This is the Australian Guitar Show. My name is Ricky Wood, and I'm sitting here with Bass Machine, I think is probably about the appropriate name, Ben Wicks.
Thanks.
Ben, good to have you on the show, man. Thank you. Yeah, it was Neil Boland who recommended I touch base with you.
Oh, cool.
Firstly, because of he knows that I love Australian-made gear, and he mentioned that you use a few Aussie-made items.
I guess growing up, my household was very green, which was probably not, super dark green, which is probably not wasn't as common maybe in the 80s.
So you mean eco
hippie,
right? I thought you meant not quite the blues.
No.
Yeah. We had the greens.
We had the greens. So worm farms and all the hippie stuff, and there was a real importance put on local produce. And so my perspective and my view of finding things in my own backyard and utilising tools from my, local sort of ecosystem has always been something that I've put value in. And I think the first sort of Australian gear I ever got my hands on was Lab Systems kind of speaker boxes and amps and stuff in the, late 90s. Bang for buck, those speaker cabs are like world class. I've still got one of those speaker cabs. It's literally the best speaker cab I think I've ever owned.
I know.
15 years, 20 years later, still kicking around.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, super, super heavy though, so it doesn't get a lot of gigs, but it's an amazing tool.
So where did you grow up? I'm kind of picking New Zealand. But...
Well, bounced around a lot. My mother was from New Zealand.
Right, cool.
But all my memories and all of my kind of childhood and stuff was here in Melbourne. Bounced around a lot, played a lot. All my brothers play. Very musical household.
Being a musical household, so it was just something you gravitated towards playing at a very young age?
I don't remember, but the story that my mother used to tell was that at 3, I used to stand in the kitchen when she was cooking and play air guitar to like the radio. And I used to pretend that the fridge was my amp.
Right,
which I think is kind of nice, turning into a bass player. I think, I used to literally go through the rigmarole of plugging my amp in and playing air guitar. I wish I remembered that. I truly do. But no. And about the age of 4, I was still talking about it. I was still talking about guitar and the need. And my parents caved and bought me like a nylon string acoustic guitar. And that was kind of the beginning of it all,
Wow. So young.
Yeah. And then at 9, I heard the soundtrack to Superfly. And I was like, what is that bit? And my cousin at the time was like, oh, that's the electric bass. And that was it.
Done.
One solid guilt trip to my divorced parents, and I ended up with an electric bass, and I've never looked back.
So you did the old, but Dad said he'd put more in, and Mum's like, well, I'm not going to be outdone by that. I'll put $1,000 in.
Well, yes. But yeah, I got away with it.
Who would be the bass players that kind of spoke to you a lot?
What was going on around me at high school and stuff was Green Day and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all that sort of stuff. So even though that was kind of the springboard, it was a little bit sort of later that I went back. Yeah, and it wasn't long before I fell into a love of the blues, and the second you do that as a bass player, you find Dunn.
Oh, yeah.
And Babbitt and Jameson, and then as you scratch through that, you find Willy Weeks, and and it just kind of disseminates further and further down. Larry Graham. The Blues Roulette started as a Wednesday night residency in Fitzroy. Myself and a drummer, and every week a different singer turns up and we jam. We play 245s, completely unrehearsed, completely off the cuff. Guess I'll go back over yonder. Way back over yonder, across that hill. So my baby don't love me. I know her sister will. Wednesday in Fitzroy and every Sunday night in the CBD. So CatFish on a Wednesday and Beneath Driver Lane on Sunday.
Yeah, there's something about flying by the seat of your pants as well.
Like actual interaction, like actually having a conversation.
Yeah.
It's actually, you know, and the amount that people comment on that, people that have never been to a roulette show and they stumble into it and they're just like, you guys were totally on the fly. You guys were, you know, it's like watching the inside of a musician's brain.
I hope people don't look at the inside of my musician's brain, because it's just a black room with a slow dripping tap in the distance.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I try my best to just have that test tone of a heartbeat machine.
You mean flatline?
Yeah, totally. Like, because if you're not thinking about it, whatever's actually happening is what happens.
It's like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer falls over and they're like, okay, brain, that's it, I'm out of here. You know?
Yeah. If you can do that and play, then it's actually...
But I like the way you mention it as a conversation. That connection has to be between how you look at each other and engage and think, oh, there was that little... And that's what I love, you know, that little note where you go, let's go back to that.
Yeah.
You know? And you find those little things, you know, that they're great.
Yeah, and I think that there's this really interesting and really fine line between knowing where it's going to go, juxtaposition to not knowing where it's going to go, but still confidently going somewhere. Roulette has its own promo and its own vibe that I'm hoping is enough that people are looking at it and are interested in what I'm doing and interested in what's going on in the roulette, that they'll turn up and then they get to see an artist who's amazing, whether they know the artist or not, do whatever they want. So they can just be themselves and they can just play some music. I can play those silly 90s pop punk tunes if they want. There's no, you know, hardly strictly blues is kind of what we say. On top of that, I've started doing tours where I bring artists in and we do a run of kind of 4 or 5 shows, ticketed shows. My intention is to foster a community. My intention is to carve out 150 or 200 gigs a year for musicians to come and enjoy themselves. Just recently we did the Marysville Jazz and Blues Festival with the Blues Brothers show, one night only at Blues Brothers Revue that I run. One of the most sort of important blues booking agents in the country bailed us up after the show and just went, I need to book this show. You've got blues players on stage playing Blues Brothers material. It's a bunch of blues guys that grew up on that music, that love those tunes, that are breathing life into songs that they've heard a million times and love.
That's right, yeah.
And that's the difference.
Do you own a cop car?
No. No.
With the old 454 in it?
That would be nice.
The lighter wouldn't work, of course.
Of course not.
No.
Well, the lighter in my Commodore doesn't work, so
so
I'm
you're
halfway
close.
there. Right?
So we just need some black and white paint?
Well, it's a white car, so we just need some black paint.
Black paint.
Done.
I know what we're doing this afternoon.
I'm a big fan. The Fuzz is first and foremost the one that I love, the one that is generally on my pedal board and my gig stuff.
Yeah, that bass fuzz, man, that's getting some...
It's epic. And I mean, I'm a Sovtek Green Russian Big Muff guy.
So you mean the tank size one?
Right.
Yeah.
I've now got a library of them. But this thing, when I plugged it in and started playing with it, and there's a few things about it that really set it apart. Having a volume that'll take you above unity. So you've essentially got a boost for both your fuzz and your clean. And the phase switch between the clean and the fuzz channel in the pedal really make it super useful and give it a couple of little tweaks and characteristics that you don't find often in a bass fuzz. And so it's become kind of a big part of my gig rig.
And he's a lovely guy to deal with.
He is. He's great.
He's so down there.
He's really cool. He's really, really cool. Like, I got in touch because John from 1920 had kind of posted about the fuzz, and you know, me and him kind of geek out about fuzzes quite often on Facebook and stuff. He was like, you've got to go and get one of those. And I was like, all right, cool. So I got in touch and went and got it, and I went round to his place and played through it. And, you know, anyone that lives what they love, I think, deserves a pat on the back and a little bit of recognition, and he does. You know, like his dining room table's got diodes and a soldering iron on it. You know, it's like, this is the dude's life.
If you went for dinner, you'd feel like you'd take a bite out of it. That's a cap.
Yeah. I'd met Dave, and he'd put some humbucking jazz pickups in a jazz bass of mine, and I was really, really happy with them. Really great, really kind of attacky, big bottom end. I was in Nashville and I ran into Bones Hillman, and I was geeking out about how amazing my jazz bass sounded, you know, and he was like, well, it's a Fender. And I was like, yeah. He's like, for whatever that instrument cost you, there's a guy somewhere, whether it's Melbourne or Sydney or, you know, Auckland, that will build you from the ground up a better instrument for the same dollar. It won't have Fender written on it, but the sum of the whole will be much better. It took me a little while to kind of come around to that as a reality, and then a bit of chatting with Dave, learning from him and building a vocabulary about tone and what I was actually looking for and what was going to help get that sound. And yeah, we put this bass together, and I haven't put it down since.
You got me with the anodized pickguard already.
Yeah, it's kind of a 70s-esque kind of neck. Mm-hmm. It's not special really in any way, shape or form. It's just very similar to the 70s P-bass that I kind of was playing for a very long time. So I'm super comfortable on it. Older body, all my basses, and I didn't go out and buy them on purpose because they were older. It's something that Dave picked up as he was doing setup work and tweaking my basses, that all of them
just happened to be. And it's like, well, is that an ear thing? I can't imagine that it's an accident. No, I think a lot of us tend to choose an instrument. We can often feel it unplugged and kind of know where it's going to take us.
Yeah.
You know, because pickups, we know we can change pickups and that it will drastically change the tone of an instrument.
Yeah, between your bridge, your pickups and your nut.
Yeah, that's it.
It's like everything can be twisted and you know, it's very malleable. That's not taking into account anything you plug in between there and what you're plugging into and what the sound guy's doing after that. Because he hand winds his own pickups, he could wind me a set and I could take them away and do a half a dozen gigs and come back and go, well, it worked all right when I was doing this, but when I tried to do that, it didn't work. So we need to find a compromise between overwinding and underwinding, or what the gauge of the wire to try and get a little bit more nose or a little bit more attack or a little bit whatever. And I think this is the third go at winding the pickup. The first one that he wound, I still have, because I wouldn't give it back to him because it was great. It's a little bit lower output and it's really got that woody kind of Jameson-esque tone to it. And I really, really loved it, but I kind of felt that it put me too far down one end of the spectrum. It was great for that, but it didn't give me the dynamic range that I wanted out of an instrument that I was gigging full time. I mean, a big part of my tonal geekery and evolution has been about trying to get dynamic range and understanding what's going to actually change that for me. The only other kind of weird and kooky thing that we did to this was that I've got a push-pull pot on my tone control that goes between a half meg and a full meg tone cap. So essentially it's like pre-CBS, post-CBS or, you know, and I actually have found, like when we first talked about doing that, I was like, that's going to be great because I'm going to be able to get these two really different sounds. And it's more useful for me when I go from a Class D amp to an old solid state amp. If I'm running a Galleon Kruger like 800 RB or a 400 RB or something like that, I actually find that the half a meg gives it a little bit more bite. It does have a use. I do use it. It is really cool. Like, I use light gauge, what people consider light gauge strings. I'm using 40s to 100, and that again is to try to get a little bit more dynamic range out of a P bass. I love running my amps quite loud, but having that range in my fingers. You know, being able to palm mute and being able to dig in and do all those things and actually have the amp move with you is super important, I find. So I'm never having to dig in super hard to get it to do anything. Like, as soon as you ask it to do it, it does it. I really love this instrument. You know, the fact that 99% of the gigs I do, and I've got vintage Ps and vintage jazz basses, and I've got a whole cupboard of weird and interesting things, and it's great to have that palette. It's great to, you know, like I did the Billy Bragg show on Friday night with an old Telecaster bass. Actually through this, because just the high output of that thing to kind of just tame it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's great to have that palette, but this thing is just incredible, and I really hope that Dave does breathe some life back into that area of what he does, because he does it so well.
Hey, so where can people find you online?
Blues Roulette.
Yes.
So there is Instagram, and there's a Facebook group and a Facebook page. In the last couple of weeks, I've started creating content and started a YouTube channel. To be honest, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what that is, whether it's Blues Roulette or Ben Wicks.
I will find out.
Ben Wicks bass or something, some sort of smattering of those words. You'll find me. You'll find me on YouTube.
Too cool, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks for being here.
I appreciate it, man. So, hey, go and find Ben online. Look in the descriptions below. You can find the Australian Guitar Show on Facebook, on Instagram, on Tinder.
How's that going?
Terrible. Yeah. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. I thought people would really want to know more about guitar on there, but they just don't. No, so yeah, you can find us there. So you follow along, do all that subscribey stuff and whatever.
Yep.
Anyway, hooroo.
Be well.